Thank you for the opportunity to testify at today's hearing to discuss GAO's work on U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services efforts to address fraud risks in immigration benefit programs. USCIS processes millions of applications and petitions each year for persons seeking to visit the U.S. for temporary activities, to reside in the U.S. on a permanent basis, or to become U.S. citizens. To ensure the integrity of the immigration system, USCIS reviews applications and petitions for potential fraud. Immigration benefit fraud is the act of willfully or knowingly misrepresenting material facts to obtain an immigration benefit for which the individual would otherwise be ineligible. Benefit fraud can occur in a number of ways and is often facilitated by document or identity fraud. Today, I'll be highlighting two recent GAO reports on USCIS's efforts to manage fraud risks across immigration benefits it adjudicates, and in 3 humanitarian parole processes for non-citizens with U.S.-based supporters. First, in September 2022, we reported that USCIS could better ensure its anti-fraud efforts are effective and efficient by taking a more strategic and risk-based approach to managing fraud risks. For example, at the time of our report, USCIS had conducted fraud risk assessments for a small number of specific immigration benefits, but did not plan to conduct additional assessments. We also found that USCIS had not developed an anti-fraud strategy or evaluated its anti-fraud activities for effectiveness and efficiency. We recommended that USCIS develop and implement a process for regularly conducting fraud risk assessments, developing and updating an anti-fraud strategy, and evaluating the effectiveness and efficiency of anti-fraud activities. USCIS agreed with these recommendations and has taken some steps toward addressing them. However, USCIS needs to take additional action to fully implement these recommendations. Second, in December of last year, we reported on humanitarian parole processes for non-citizens with U.S.-based supporters. The particular processes we reviewed were 1, the processes for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, known as CHNV, 2, Uniting for Ukraine, and 3, family reunification parole. Our analysis of Department of Homeland Security data found that from May 2022 through September 2024, the department granted parole to about 774,000 non-citizens under these processes. In implementing the processes, USCIS was responsible for reviewing supporter applications. If USCIS confirmed the application, U.S. Customs and Border Protection was responsible for vetting the prospective beneficiary, determining whether to authorize them to travel to the U.S., and considering them for a discretionary grant of parole upon their arrival. Shortly after the processes began, USCIS began receiving referrals of potential fraud and in 2024 conducted an analysis of supporter applications. Based on this analysis, USCIS found that fraud indicators were widespread in Uniting for Ukraine and CHNV. Fraud indicators among the applications included supporter information belonging to deceased individuals, counterfeit or altered documents, and thousands of applications with at least one piece of fictitious supporter information. The Department of Homeland Security suspended the CHNV and Uniting for Ukraine processes in 2024 due to the fraud risks and subsequently terminated CHNV in March 2025. USCIS assessments attributed the risks identified in the parole processes to insufficient internal control activities. We concluded that although DHS has ended the supporter-based parole processes, USCIS could still benefit from having an internal control plan in place for future situations that may introduce new or increased fraud risks, and we recommended that USCIS develop such a plan. In closing, implementing our recommendations would help USCIS take a more strategic and risk-based approach to managing fraud risks. We will continue to follow up on USCIS's actions to implement our recommendations. This concludes my prepared statement, and I would be pleased to answer any questions that members may have.